Welcome to this new episode of the Kalya Perera YouTube channel. Today we are going to conduct this episode in English medium, so that is an sort of exception. Usually we conduct our programs in Sinhala language, but from time to time we of course do have discussions in English. So this is also such an exceptional moment, and my guest today is Professor Jayadev Yangoda. Is no stranger to the Kalya Perera YouTube channel. So we have been discussing various issues in relation to the contemporary politics several times, and so what we are going to do today is to we were discussing with him in Sinhala language about the current political situation, and we are not just a repetition of what we were discussing in Sinhala language program, but actually to cover the same area, the same issues that we touched upon in the previous program. And I think giving you a brief introduction about the Professor Jayadev Yangoda. So he's probably I would say that the most capable person and in commenting on the current political scenario, so he comment on contemporary politics both in Sinhala and English, and both in local and international media, and he is an expert on not only Sri Lankan politics but also South Asian politics as well. And so there are some other qualifications. I would come back to it later, but Professor Yangoda, I welcome you to the program. And I would start with a very straightforward question. The question is that, so we are living in truly a kind of transformative age in our modern political evolution, in modern political history. And exactly 1 year ago, so there was a parliamentary election where a political party, who of course won the presidential election that took place 1 year and 1 month ago, which was a kind of peripheral political entity before that. Even
you mean the NPP?
Yeah, I'm talking about the National People's Power, the NPP, led by current President Anurukumara Dissanayake. And so they came to power. That they are coming to power. I would like to ask you the question, was it a mere governmental change or something more than that, right? How do you, what do you make out of this important political event, Professor Yangoda?
First of all, I'll like to thank Kalya Perera and Professor Nilmal Ranjit for inviting me to take part in this discussion. And as you pointed out, this month completes the first year of the NPP government in power. The president completed his first term in September. The emergence of the NPP as Sri Lanka's new ruling party last year, in my reading, constitutes a very important transformation of Sri Lankan politics. And that transformation is an outcome of years and years of other developments that have taken place in Sri Lanka society and politics, and also in democracy as well. So let me very briefly say that what happened in 2024 in September and November was not mere a government change, as you said, is not a mere regime change. I think what is more significant is that emergence of the NPP as the ruling party, and also the transfer of power from the previous political class to the NPP marks, in my view, a transition of political power in Sri Lanka from the traditional elite-led political class to a new, social formation or social coalition as politically represented by the NPP. I have been using this elite and non-elite category or binary to describe this political change in Sri Lanka. So this is not merely a transition of power from one government, one ruling party to another ruling party, one stratum of the ruling elite to another stratum of the ruling elite as it happened in the past, but a transition of political power from one set of class coalitions to another set of class coalitions that represent two opposing camps in Sri Lankan society and politics. That's what I describe as the transition of political power from the elite to the non-elite social groups and political formation that represent those social groups. That's one. Secondly, that transition has not happened accidentally, and there has been for many years the building up of a particular trend in Sri Lankan politics that was probably not very clear 3 or 4 years ago. But there was this desire coming from the society for a shift of political power to a new group of leaders or new party formation that represents the ordinary people. We call sometimes, use the word subaltern social class, and there's that includes the working class, the peasantry, the poor, the middle classes, unemployed, the social groups that have traditionally been described as the ruled. So the transition of political power from the ruling to the ruled social groups has been slowly building up. And Professor Nirmal, you just told me that this morning you went to an event to celebrate or rather commemorate the death of Reverend Madula Sobita, who in 2013-14, that period started the movement called National Movement for Social Justice. So Sadharana Samaja Sandha Vyapare. Now that in a way attracted a lot of people who were disillusioned with the traditional political class, political leadership and the ruling class. That is why Sobita Thera's movement took a mass character. So actually the Yahapalani regime came into power 2015 because of the strength of this new social movement led by a new leader, the Reverend Buddhist monk, who did not represent the old ruling elites. So that marked a very interesting shift in the people's desire for a change. So then we had this 2022 citizen struggle, called Aragalaya, and that for the first time, thousands of Sri Lankan citizens mobilized on their own, seeking a political change, a new political culture. They were protesting against corruption, abuse of power, and concentration of political power in the hands of the small, group of Colombo elites. So, in other words, there was a desire on the part of citizens expressed during the Aragalaya for a deep democratization of Sri Lankan politics, right? And that, in a way, represented the global trend at that time for democratic kind of new wave of democratization that started in the Arabian, the Mediterranean region in Tunisia, what we call Arab Spring. And Sri Lanka's Aragalaya also represented what I call this ongoing democratic revolution. So Sri Lanka's, that Aragalaya led to the shift of political power tentatively. Got that government of President Rajapaksa had to resign. And of course in 2024, NPP could come into power in the context of a political vacuum
Yeah.
created by that Aragalaya, as well as a, the mass political desire for a transformation of
Yeah.
politics, transformation of who governs. So that is very significant.
Yeah.
So I want to make a third point. You see, the NPP has a certain political history. It's a part of the evolution of the JVP from an underground revolutionary movement to a modern parliamentary party. So the NPP at the 2020 parliamentary election had only about 3% of votes,
Yeah.
and
20,
also 3 or 4
2019.
seats in parliament. So it's a very significant that such a small party in the opposition in 2020,
90, yeah, 2020.
yeah, in 2024,
Yeah.
it's over 65% of votes. There's such a shift. So this radical transformation of Sri Lanka's, political, scene is also historically significant. And we can later talk about what is the historical significance of this.
No, I think you pointed to a very important, the aspects of the current political landscape where we can, locate the election victory of the NPP, and also I think so you raised the issue, you mentioned about Reverend Sobita, and actually, I would like to recall I made a speech at the occasion, and I actually raised two things, about the Sobita Thero's contribution, and so then he sort of represent the I think the popular desire for a change in the political culture.
Yes.
So there's a deterioration of the Sri Lankan democratic political culture, particularly since early 1980s, with the growth of authoritarian regime.
And
he was personally targeted by the regime at that time, Sobita Thero, and also the very coining of the word social justice.
Yes.
The just society, sadharana samajaya. So I thought that also very important, these two aspects.
Yes.
The social justice and a good, civilized political culture, change in the political culture. So I think that's, he thought that, the changing the system of executive presidential constitution would lead to that kind of transformation, right? So I think, so that's popular desire behind 2015, political change as well, right? So but that was
aborted actually.
Aborted, and that transformation was mediated by mainstream major old political class, right? So I don't know, I'm wondering whether would you agree if I say that the white was aborted because that it was led by a part of the old political elite. Right?
That's right. Actually, there was a process of rapid disillusionment on the part of the masses, on the part of the people, with regard to the traditional ruling elite who have governed Sri Lanka, ruled Sri Lanka since independence. So that's why there was a historical context or historical situation that was ripe for something like semi-revolution and transformation of who rules the country.
And
so
also, if I disturb you, in a way, people gave an opportunity for the older political elite, to come up with a major transformation in the system in 2015, and so they miserably failed.
Yes.
So that's one of the ways to understand what happened in 2022 and 2024. Would you agree with that?
You are very right. There was a chain of events.
Yes.
Yeah, 2014-15, this movement for national movement for social justice, led by Reverend Madhula Visobita, and then there were a lot of expectation on the part of the people, and this, that government actually did not actually meet the people's expectations,
It ended
and
up
they
in
made the
as a
mistake
disaster,
of exactly. It's actually that experiment,
Yeah.
democratization experiment, ended up in a disaster. Actually, they brought the Rajapaksa family back to power. But what happened later is that after 2005, the government, you see, opened the path for the Rajapaksas to return to power.
Yeah.
And that also, although there's a lot of popular support for the return of the Rajapaksas, and that disillusionment with that experiment, the people's experiment, was also very quick. So in the government change occurred in 2019 with Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa's election with a massive majority in the parliament election. They got 2/3 majority in parliament. But the economic crisis and also the public health crisis with the COVID, that really pushed the government into a crisis. And the agency, that really political agency that entered into the new political process was the citizens, not political parties, not even the NPP or the JVP at that time. So the citizens, Sri Lankan citizens, in a way, wanted to take the democratic process into their own hands. That's why about 3 months, about 4 months, they were protesting in Colombo. So that was the turning point in Sri Lankan politics. After Aragale 2022, Sri Lankan politics changed to such an extent that Sri Lankan politics was no longer what it was until 2022. So there's a new, actually, turning point in Sri Lankan politics. So it was the NPP, the only JVP, NPP combined, the only political entity that could actually make use of that historical opening. Traditional political parties, none of them could, because the people had, presented new set of political, expectations. No traditional political party actually, offer any alternative to themselves. So the NPP was there as the, historical, to make use of that historical moment.
So, can we, dwell a little bit more on the crisis of the traditional political elite, particularly the party system, the two-party system, the two-party blocks were the major pillars of the traditional, the let's say, pre-2022 political history. Although there were internal evolution of these two parties, and the SLFP, had an internal crisis, and led to the formation of SLPP, Sri Lanka, Podujana Peramuna, led by Rajapaksas, and so then the split within the UMP, which led to the formation of Samagi Jana Balawega, SJP, led by Sajith Premadasa, but still, so these two camps were there.
Yes.
Two political blocks were there, and the traditional political elites just crossing, over and the joining, each of these blocks. And what happened in 2022 and afterwards? So the collapse of this entire, the
edifice of traditional party system.
Of traditional system.
Yes.
Isn't this a kind of, I would say a kind of tectonic change sort of thing? So is there something to be reckoned with? I mean, as a political scientist, I think definitely you have you can say more about it.
Yeah, I agree with your phrase. The tectonic change that has taken place in the political party system in Sri Lanka. You see, as you correctly pointed out, although Sri Lanka has had a multi-party system, it's a very peculiar multi-party system that existed in the form of two centered coalition alliances. Right? We have a we have had a dominant two-party system in Sri Lanka since the 1950s. So what has happened is that the party system, the two-party system and also the multi-party system with the dominant two-party system, the system has faced a crisis after 2022. That crisis in a way was an outcome of the very kind of de-democratization of Sri Lankan politics, de-democratization in the party system, and so the authoritarian tendencies of Sri Lankan politics in general, and the inter-party system as well. So let me explain it very briefly. Now, the two parties, two dominant parties, SLFP and the Sri Lanka Freedom Party and the United National Party, they represent two strata of the traditional elites, particularly Sinhala ruling elites. The UNP represents the most conservative section of that elite, and the SLFP kind of a more nationalist oriented, more kind of a social democratic oriented section of that class. Now, so gradually, particularly after the late 1970s, there has been a specific decline in Sri Lankan party system, in the sense that parties have been kind of experiencing erosion of the grassroots level party organizations. There are two main reasons for that. One is that the ruling parties, it can be one of the dominant parties, when they are in power, they ignored the party building and maintaining and sustaining party organization at the grassroots level, because they were using the government and political power to sustain the political party. Ultimately, the political parties became parties of the leaders, not parties of the masses. Actually, at one time, both the SLFP and the UNP had a mass-based electoral basis. The second reason is this, the supremacy of the clientelist politics. It's a part of Sri Lanka's electoral democracy. Because of the clientelist politics, the ruling parties or opposition parties, when they are in opposition, could always rely on their clientelist networks rather than party networks based on active membership. So there was an erosion of the popular basis, social basis of both SLFP and the UNP and other parties as well. So ultimately parties became kind of, they were kind of skeletons in terms of leaders organizations. So they were isolated and alienated from their mass base, the mainstream political parties. When the elections were held in 2024, it was very clear that the NPP had an advantage that the other parties did not have at all. That is a well-organized party network and organizational structure they had. So what happened was that the mainstream parties ceased to be political parties in the real sense of the democratic political parties, and then the NPP could emerge as only well-organized political party, and that one factor that contributed to the easy victory of the NPP in 2024, the presidential and subsequently parliamentary elections. So Sri Lanka's party system is going through a very, very significant transformation. So there is actually not only the decline, but slow disappearance of the traditional parties, traditional leaderships from the political landscape, and the emergence of this NPP. And perhaps in my view, it will be very, very difficult for these traditional political parties to come back to Sri Lankan politics with any degree of political importance. The reason is that in 2022, the citizens Aragalaya changed the whole all dimensions of Sri Lankan parliamentary politics and democratic politics. After Aragalaya, Sri Lankan politics ceased to be what it used to be in the past. So only the NPP could really adapt itself to this transformation that people expected, citizens expected through Aragalaya in 2022, but the opposition parties continue to demonstrate their inability not only to adapt themselves to the post-Aragalaya new political conditions, but also their failure to understand the political significance, political meaning of 2022 Aragalaya. So what, my reading is that, these traditional political parties are incapable of reforming themselves to make themselves relevant to post-Aragalaya Sri Lankan politics.
Now, Professor Angud, I would like to reiterate, and highlight, underline, very important remark that you made. I think, when you look at the existing political discourse among some quarters, then, there is a tendency to perceive the political transformation that took place in the last few years in terms of certain short-term events, like, the crisis due to the COVID pandemic, and then economic collapse, the lack of the fuel, and these
breakdown of
issues,
everyday life.
Breakdown of everyday life. These short-term events.
Yes.
Right. So they think that the NPP was benefited from those short-term events, right? But unlike that reading, so you pointed out a kind of major, structural transformation that have been taking place over some, period of time, right? So the one that I'm more interested in is that the new time kind of political behavior among the masses.
Yes.
So when you look at 1950s and particularly 60s and 70s, so there was a strong party allegiance among the masses.
Yes.
As you said, in ground level, so there were strong loyalties for these two parties.
Yeah.
Not only for two parties, even for the left-wing parties, LSSP and CP in their constituencies, right? But there was a decline in the last, I would say that in the last 30-40 years. So you see a kind of gradual decline of these strong party allegiances.
That's correct. Actually, that's what Dr. Pradeep Piri's research points out.
Right.
Actually, the relationship between the party and the voter has been so weakened. That is, the intermediaries between the party and the voters are no longer the party structure, party organization,
so that
but
can
the
be
patron-client network.
That can be viewed as a kind of diagnosis of the political crisis.
Political crisis. The crisis of the political parties is also a dimension of crisis of representation in Sri Lankan politics, democracy. And there was also another dimension, I think, we need to highlight. That is that the loss of public trust in the whole political class, political leadership, and the political parties. Because electoral politics has always been one that has been governed by electoral, promises that political parties make. And they make a lot of promises, but they come into power. They, for example, in the past, they promised to investigate into bribery, corruption, very serious human rights violations. But when they came to power, they forgot even the abolition of the executive presidential system. You see, the electoral promises were meant to actually deceive the citizens in order to persuade them to vote for them. So that when that happens continuously over several decades, the citizens as voters come to realize or come to understand the kind of hollowness of that kind of representative politics. right? That is why I think the people had begun to lose their trust and confidence in not only the traditional political parties, political classes, but also the system of representative government. You see, during the Aragalaya, it became very clear. So there was a demand, that slogan that came that all 225 or 55, however, 225 MPs should immediately resign. And then actually Sri Lanka,
no to all 225.
exactly. The crisis was not only crisis of political parties, it was a crisis of Sri Lanka's democracy. It was a crisis of Sri Lanka's representative democracy. It was a crisis of Sri Lanka's parliamentary democracy. In that sense, that some kind of a revival of democracy became one of the expectations of the city, one of the strongest political expectations of the citizens. Yet only the NPP had the, I think, the wisdom in a way, political wisdom to make, to not only to understand that, but also offer a new political culture to the people.
I think, Professor
that
Yangode,
slogan became very effective.
That's a very bold statement, I mean, you made that, it's only the NPP that, that represented that new desire for democracy. And I think I want to come back to it. But, before that, I also again want to highlight, some aspects of, what you said. I mean, so there was a kind of disillusionment of the system, but as a matter of fact, the people continued to vote for these two, the party formations, right? But at the same time, if you carefully observe the way they voted, right, while they voted, so you still could identify the, the discontent, right? For example, I would give you an example. In 2004 parliamentary election, when the JVP made a coalition with the SLFP to form this UPFA, United People's Freedom Alliance, and so they ran 39 candidates. All of them won, and they topped, most of them, I think majority of them topped the preferential vote list. So sometimes defeating the very, the old strong leaders of the SLFP, including Mr. Andru Bandaranayake in Gampa district, where he came second to, he became second to Vijitha Herath, who was a fairly a newcomer to politics, right? So I think, in a way, that represents the kind of, the people got an opportunity while voting for the major party to select a new group of people. So they did it so. So I think, that's very important. So then, I mean, so then I would like to come to, that statement you made. It was the NPP who captured this opportunity and who which represented that, the popular desire for. And you mentioned about the revival of democracy, right? So, but if I sort of represent the other side of the, I mean,
you know, the devil's advocate.
So there's a spectrum of opinions, and so there some people see that this rise of NPP and particularly the JVP leadership as a kind of negation of
a threat to democracy.
Threat to democracy, right? So then there are some strong beliefs that there's going to be a party dictatorship, right? What would you make out of this kind of criticism?
Actually, during the 2024 presidential and parliament election campaign, one of the major slogans of the opposition was that the JVP has a very, very undemocratic, actually anti-democratic history. It's a 1971 insurgency and particularly 1988-89, that period, violence, anti-state rebellions, all these arguments were there. But interesting thing is that the JVP has gone through a transformation. JVP has a history of engaging with democracy, and initial first phase of JVP was totally committed to what one may call the revolutionary politics through armed struggle.
So let me disturb.
So that's part of the history.
Let me disturb you on this, because this is a very important point that we need a bit more detail, because you are the most qualified person to do so, because so you said history of the JVP. In terms of the democracy and the history of the JVP. So in Sinhala. In Sinhala episode, we discussed it as a kind of a difficult dialogue, right? So I think, especially I want to mention that you were the one who actually made the oldest, statements of the democracy in JVP, history of the JVP, and so you penned some of the articles where existing discourse of democracy was highly criticized in 1970 or so. Can you go back to that history of the relationship between the JVP and the democracy? And,
I'll be very brief. Actually, the first phase of the JVP from 1966-67, that beginning of the JVP, and 1978, I would say, in JVP's understanding of democracy was rooted in Marxist and Maoist critique of liberal parliamentary democracy. And many of the revolutionary parties, not only the JVP at that time, the global south in India, Pakistan, Indonesia, there was a whole lot of, in Latin America, African countries, actually they rejected parliamentary democracy. They thought that the armed revolution was the only way for social and political emancipation. So JVP believed in that theory at that time, and I wrote an article. Basically, I remember that in the JVP newspaper in the early 1970s. It's a kind of a Marxist, Maoist critique of what we call bourgeois democracy, bourgeois parliamentary democracy. The idea there is that it's only the Marxist party and the working class proletariat political party that would bring in to society a kind of a more in-depth democracy. It's not the kind of a democracy that the bourgeoisie or the ruling classes, capitalist classes would use to deceive the people. So that's a kind of a whole Marxist position. But after 1978, when the JVP leaders came out of power, actually they had decided to enter into parliamentary politics. So that's why they actually contested, you will recall this District Development Council elections in 1980. If I recall correctly, they also contested local government elections. And then of course the presidential election 1982. And after 83 riots, the UNP government proscribed the JVP, and the JVP, that's the end of the first phase of experiment with democracy by the JVP. So of course we know the story after 1983 till about 1989, second JVP insurgency. And of course after 1989, the JVP, after I would say 1990, there was a new leadership that emerged, a new generation. They seem to have decided that armed struggle is no longer the strategically most suitable, viable path for them, and so they selected the democratic path. So they entered the electoral politics. In 1994 election, they won, I think, one seat in parliament. Of course, the JVP was banned at that time, but the JVP had contested, I think, the Sri Lanka Progressive Front. But between 1978 and 79, there seemed to have the slow transformation of the JVP's political strategy. Instead of armed revolution and revolutionary struggle, the JVP seems to have transformed itself during that period into a party that accepts parliamentary democracy. So that's why they contested the 1994 parliamentary election, but not as the JVP, but as a
Sri
party,
Lanka Progressive Front.
The Sri Lankan Progressive Front. Lanka Pragatisheeli Peramuna. But what happened later on is that the JVP's proscription was lifted, and then that allowed the JVP to continue to work in the Democratic Front as a political party. So that's the second phase of JVP's politics. Actually, that phase is very important in terms of electoral participation. So now, when the JVP contested the presidential election in 1982, JVP candidate, yes, Mohanami Javir actually got 4.10. It's a fairly significant percentage of votes. But in 2001 election, right, JVP got 16% of, 16 seats.
Yeah.
9.10 percentage of votes. That is a fairly high number. In 2000 parliamentary election, the one election before that, they got 10 seats, I think.
Yeah.
And in 2005, what happened was the JVP supported Mahinda Rajapaksa did not contest itself. 2004 election also, presidential election, it did not contest itself. But in 2015, at the parliamentary election, JVP got 6 seats and 4.82% of votes. That's the range. Actually, it's highest number of seats, as you said earlier, was when UP, the JVP was a member of the United People's
Freedom Alliance,
UPFP, and they got 42 seats, but there were 39 of them because they gifted 3 of their seats to the coalition. So that's a kind of roller coaster process that JVP experienced in parliamentary politics.
Yeah.
But actually, the real transformation of the JVP as a parliamentary party took place, after 2005, that the Yapania government experience. I think that's where around 2020 or 2021, the JVP leadership has decided to form the National People Power.
So
NPP.
I think it was in 2018, just before the 2019 presidential election. Yeah.
But
also, don't you think that this the change in the leadership? I think it was in 2014, where Anurakumara Disanayaka became the leader. Replacing the kind of old guard Somwa Samarasinghe. Don't you think that itself a kind of a new era of the history of the JVP?
Yes, with the Somwa Samarasinghe represented, as you said, the old guard, the 1960s, 70s politics of the JVP. But the new generation, that's Anurakumara Disanayaka and others, even Mr. Tilwin Silva, who joined the JVP in the 1980s, seems to have accepted this new strategic shift of the JVP in terms of its politics. So the NPP's first manifesto that was released in 2021 actually deviated significantly from its traditional party manifestos. Actually, politically, in terms of political ideology, my interpretation is that manifesto 2021 combine liberal parliamentary democracy with a vision for social democratic transformation. Actually, that's the kind of a vision the JVP.
No, I think I would like to link to your narrative what happened in 2008 and 2011 when the two groups of the JVP left the party. One, the former one led by Vimal Weerawansa, who took a rather, ethno-nationalist, line, and I think it was in the 2011 when a group led by Mr. Kumar Gunaratnam, who actually represented the kind of pre-1990, revolutionary.
That's right,
approach.
Marxist.
Yeah. So don't you think that these internal splits also contributed positively to regain in the new era of democratic revival?
Yes. Now, Vimal Weerawansa represented Sinhala Buddhist nationalist strand of the JVP politics.
Which was, of course, a part of the JVP heritage.
Yes, exactly. That was actually that in a way enabled the JVP to get a lot of votes during that period. Because that line had an appeal, electoral appeal. And actually that particular split enabled the JVP to move away from Sinhalese nationalist ideological commitments. Actually, Mr. Anura Kumara Disanayake, in my reading, represents that moderate, strand in the JVP. And then the other one that you said, Mr. Kumar Mugaratnam, he led the faction of the old-style JVP, kind of a Bolshevik type of a party, and the Marxist-Leninists committed to socialist transformation. And they thought that the JVP, under the new leadership, is moving away from that Marxist-Leninist socialist vision. So what happened was, as you correctly pointed out,
away from orthodox Marxist line.
Position. What, as you suggested, these two splits in a way enable that section of the JVP to transform itself into a more moderate democratic political party. I think the formation of the NPP around 2020-2021 was the outcome of it. Actually, if you look at the NPP's 2024 manifesto, you could see that transformation in a way culminating in a kind of a more comprehensive statement of vision and policy. The 2021 NPP manifesto was more or less a initial basic primary outline. But the last election manifesto is a kind of more comprehensive restatement of this transition to a parliamentary political party and embracing of parliamentary democracy, not necessarily liberal democracy, embracing of parliamentary democracy and also social democracy. It's a kind of, as far as I can see, although the NPP does not use this conceptual language or ideological language, I can see the 2024 manifesto as a fusion of a vision for modernity, that means modernized transformation of Sri Lanka's economy, society and politics, and democratic transformation, as well as a social democratic policy commitment. But on the other hand, there's also important dimension, when we look at this link between 2022 citizen struggle and the NPP, you see 2022 citizen struggle in a way pointed out that traditional Sri Lanka's democracy has to be rescued, liberated, freed from the clutches of the traditional political elite, because they are the people who took Sri Lanka's democracy into authoritarianism, brought kind of a hybrid democracy in which liberal parliamentary democracy was subsumed by this authoritarian politics. So the NPP's challenge is now to, introduce a kind of new vision of democracy for Sri Lanka, emanating from the popular expectations expressed during Aragalaya for a new model of democracy in which, the limits of liberal parliamentary democracy could be transcended, and also, in order to address the crisis of Sri Lanka's parliamentary and representative democracy, to have new democratic experiments in order to deepen democracy. So in my analysis, 2022 Aragalaya also highlighted the relevance and importance of bringing dimensions of republican democracy, communitarian democracy, democracy expectations in ethnic politics, and feminist democracy. All these needs to be combined and fused with liberal democracy. So liberal democracy alone cannot take the democratizing agenda forward at all in Sri Lanka. It has to be a new vision for democracy based on popular expectations for a deeper democracy in post-Aragalaya Sri Lanka.
Okay, now it's clear. Basically, your argument is that the NPP was benefited
Yeah.
from the new democratic awareness, democratic revival among the masses.
Right.
And so they were benefited from the decline of the traditional political
Yes.
elite, traditional political parties, and so on. So now they won
Yes.
2 elections in last year, and 1 election this year, right? Local government election. So now let's move on to the last topic that I would like you to discuss about the way forward, right? And also I think I would like to take into consideration two aspects. One is that now 1 year is gone, so we have some background to discuss the performance of the new government, and also there's another background where the defeated political forces also rallying their forces, and so they are trying to so there is a propaganda, there is a massive propaganda campaign against the government where they argue that there is a kind of new kind of constitutional dictatorship, right?
New kind of
constitutional dictatorship,
yes.
right? So vyavasthapita ajñādāyakatva, something like that. And also there are some there are some voices where they argue that all the parties, irrespective of the old political rivalries between the UPFA, the SLPP and the UMP and so on, they have to come together because they compare it with the US and the Soviet Union come together to defeat Nazi Germany under Hitler, right? So in a way that they are comparing the NPP with Nazi Germany. I mean, it's interesting, I mean, when you look at the, I mean, I would say the so-called Colombo civil society, where you also, we have a lot of mutual friends, right? So they also, share most of this pessimism. But on one hand, you have a very, strong optimism about
Yes.
the JVP,
Yes.
the NPP victory and the way forward. I mean, is a kind of paradoxical situation. I mean, I would like you to, look at the future scenario as well.
You see, first I like to say that this opposition critique,
Yeah.
that NPP represents a very, authoritarian, hard authoritarian,
Yeah.
or totalitarian alternative.
No, I mean, in a way, it is understandable, as any opposition would try to, paint a black picture
very,
on the
very
existing
negative,
government.
dark
But
picture.
is there any, serious, thing to be contemplated on, So that's it. Yeah.
You see, it depends. Now, there are huge irony in what
Yeah.
the opposition says
Yeah.
is that the opposition parties have been actually actively contributing to the decline of Sri Lanka
Yeah.
liberal parliamentary democracy. They were the people who, at one level, introduced this authoritarianism, and they were those people who sustained it until last year.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why there's a huge irony in what this opposition is saying. But on the other hand, the opposition parties have to get together because they feel terribly threatened by this government's new campaign against corruption, new campaign against this drug mafia.
Yeah.
Because they think that opposition is being targeted by the government
Right.
because of that. Because the anti-corruption campaign, in any case, any country
Yeah.
will target
Yeah.
political parties, political classes that have been in
Yeah.
power because
Yeah.
they were the people who have really normalized
Yeah.
and practiced in a huge scale the politics of corruption. So they are very worried. Actually, most of the opposition parties and leaders have this existential crisis to deal with as long as the NPP is in power. Now they have this part of the existential crisis is that the opposition parties say UNP had only one member in parliament, and SLPP the same story, and then the SJB has no possibility of getting into the position of a ruling party for 5 years.
Yeah.
Because NPP is a fairly strong government with
Yeah.
the two-thirds majority, and NPP controls the executive presidency also. So that's a usual propaganda campaign at one level of the opposition. On the other hand, there's an opposition that faces a real existential threat. Therefore, they have to justify their campaign by highlighting, not only highlighting, by exaggerating and also painting a very, very dark picture about the future of democracy. So we can see to what extent they can really mobilize the masses.
Yeah.
So in my view, it's very, very difficult because the opposition parties have not so far demonstrated any capacity to reinvent themselves to suit and to be relevant to the post-Aragalaya.
That's exactly the point that I want to ask you. Yeah.
Politics.
Yeah.
I want to make a second point if we have time.
Yeah.
You see, this is the time for reimagining democracy, reinventing democracy, not going back to the old authoritarian democracy or old style liberal parliamentary democracy. That's a global trend actually, not only Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, in Nepal, in Madagascar, in Tanzania, in Indonesia, in many countries, because people wanted new kind of democracy, not the old kind of democracy, not old parliamentary democracy. So that requires a huge capacity for reimagining politics, reimagining democracy. In my reading, the NPP has demonstrated that it has that capacity. That's why I'm a lot of optimistic about the NPP's future. The NPP, at least at the leadership level, that capacity for reimagining politics, capacity for reinventing politics and reinventing democratic politics and democracy enables any political party launch a new process, new program of re-democratization of Sri Lankan society. So my argument is that none of the opposition parties, none of the opposition political leaders, even those new political leaders who now think that they have a political future, they don't demonstrate any capacity for reimagining Sri Lankan politics, reimagining Sri Lankan democracy in order to satisfy citizens' desires, expectations for a new democracy in Sri Lanka.
So, Professor Anguda, one last question. I think we have come to a last stage of our discussion, but since most probably this program may be viewed by many people, particularly expatriate communities, so who are very much concerned about the national unity, the issue of the reconciliation and that kind
national
of
question.
the national question, and so that's a very important thing. And one of the key aspects of the political crisis in Sri Lanka is the north-south division. The two ethno-nationalist, the development of two ethno-nationalist politics, and so which led to a war. Now war is over, and also there is another aspect. This when you look at the Tamil politics has been dominated by this secessionist tendency, where people tend to think that the only solution for their emancipation is to form a kind of separate state, or at least a confederation type of thing, and so on, federalism and so on. Now that secessionist era seems to have gone, right? And so there's a new context, and so to what extent that's NPP is capable of addressing to this new situation, not only in the south but also in the north, particularly in relation to the issue of reconciliation of these divided constituencies, ethno-religious, the unifying these ethno-religious constituencies.
Yes, NPP has come under a lot of criticism and attacks by its critics, particularly in the past year. And the main criticism is that the NPP is not ready to continue the kind of solution that has been formulated since 1990s. So the JVP's or rather NPP's position is to kind of, to look at this ethnic conflict from a fresh perspective, not through the perspective that has been, there for quite some time. So, for example, they are not talking about the 13th Amendment in that language. They will talk about devolution and sharing of power. They don't talk about Lanka Accord because they don't go to Delhi and promise Delhi leaders that we are committed to implementing 13th Amendment. So, what is interesting is that the NPP is for, we call it the manifesto, they are for greater devolution, but without using that political discourse. They are for reconciliation, but they are without using that particular language. So that is, I think, the difficult part of a lot of these opposition parties as well as civil society groups. Understand why is it that NPP is not using the language that we are using. But one important thing about the NPP, as far as I can understand, they have their own political vocabulary. They have their own political vision. That actually does not exclude power sharing, devolution, and building a new Sri Lanka where, ethnic conflict requires a new kind of approach. And you use that expression, that post-secessionist era in Sri Lanka. This is not only a post-war era. So the NPP has the capacity to, in a way, think along those terms. But the opposition parties are still prisoners of the 1990s discourse. So that's actually one of the reasons why there is no, even the dialogue between the NPP and civil society, NPP and opposition parties, NPP and Tamil political parties for this issue. So that I think that's a gap that we have to address. And there is another point I want to make. In Tamil society and Muslim society, the same elites that people consider as no longer relevant, they are dominating political discourse. Actually, after the Civil War, after 2009, there's another ironical development which you pointed out last time. The same old Tamil Vellal elites are back in power. So I think the problem with Tamil and Muslim societies in Sri Lanka is that old elites continue to define the political imagination, political discourse, and political engagements that Tamil society will have with the international community as well as the Sri Lankan ruling party. So that has to be changed. So that's what I said, that there's at the moment a difficulty in dialogue between the NPP government and Tamil political leadership and Muslim political leadership. Because the Muslim political leadership and Tamil political leadership are very comfortable with dealing with the SLFP or the UNP or the SLPP, not with the NPP. Even the last parliamentary election, the ITAC supporter, Mr. Sajid Premadasa, expecting that he would come into power. So there's a breakdown of communication. So my position is that there has to be some kind of new communication between NPP government, but NPP government represents an entirely new class of political leaders. The Tamil and Muslim societies don't have that new class of political leaders. So how to overcome that difficulty to resurrect the dialogue between NPP government and Tamil and Muslim political leaders? I don't know. Maybe High Commission of Human Rights in the Geneva probably will have to do
you cannot forget the fact that in a way Anura Kumara Disanayaka has somewhat successful in terms of capturing the imagination of the northern masses as well to a certain extent.
Yes. But what I have learned from Jaffna and also people who know about Jaffna politics, NPP received most of the votes from the ordinary people, that's oppressed castes and class communities, the so-called Dalit communities. I am also told that NPP is at the moment doing a lot of work with those marginalized, oppressed communities, particularly oppressed caste communities. That's how the old left, LSSP and CP Shan, they have a actually the southern progressive parties have a legacy of working with these
Yeah.
non-elite social classes. NPP is doing that.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that those classes will also have to have a voice
Yeah.
in deciding their future, not only the elite. So that is an issue.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that in an election, NPP will continue to get Tamil votes because the NPP has been successful in penetrating into those
Okay,
social
those
classes,
social
non-elite social classes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Professor Yangoda. I think what I can say is that we have a lot of things to discuss.
right.
In another occasion, and I think I promise you that I will come back to Professor Yangoda, and thank you very much for discussing about although the discussion is fairly long, I think it's worth listening to his insights, and thank you again.